By way of introduction, that is to say, we Creative Time and the Penn Foundation, the Penn World Voices Festival, got together with Title, which is the Occupy Theory, Occupy Strategy journal of the Occupy movement. And I'm really delighted today to be here with Amin and Natasha, who are two of the editors of Title. And we're going to hold a kind of a different setup than a typical panel or lecture. And we would love to invite you to participate in that. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Amin to and Natasha to get us going.
Okay. I want to encourage people to get closer if they can.
Why you didn't write on the website that you were not here? It was. Sorry. That's okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry for people that are coming with a different expectation. We're just trying to fill the void. A couple of us are in the movement. We've been in the movement since August. And those writings of the people here are an inspiration. And the journal that you're getting is free, and it's from the movement, and it's in conversation with those writers. But at any rate, I want, Occupy is about participation, about kind of empowerment of individuals to be active. And what I want to shed light on, because mass media doesn't do, is what is Occupy, in my opinion. And I feel like back in August when we got together, a few things that you keep hearing over and over again is like, well, they don't know what they're doing, they don't have any demands, they are a non-hierarchical movement, they have no sense of politics. And what's really important about Occupy is that it's introducing a new form of politics where you don't need a leader, where you create space and you're generous and other people can lead. And you can lead and follow and do these things. Judith Butler has a piece that's published entitled about what are the demands. And she makes a good argument. Maybe we'll read some of that. The other thing that I think Occupy is about is, like, for the longest time, people have told us that you can have a social movement about the environment. You can have a social movement about gender, feminism. You can have a social movement about all these things, but I think in the 21st century we have to rethink what a movement means, what a social movement means, and how can we bring about change. So in that sense, Occupy is experimenting with that notion. I think another thing that Occupy is doing is that it's recognizing that in these horizontal conversations, we're all very smart people, that there are voices that are excluded from the conversation when they shouldn't be, and that language itself is exclusive, and that it encompasses a civilization, and that when we're talking about these enormous issues in our world, we should be more self-reflexive in that. And I think Occupy takes the approach is like not everyone at the table that matters, and everyone matters is at the table. So how can we have everyone at the table making the decisions instead of a few making the decisions about the future of many? And one of the ways that we've done that is by horizontal organizing, which isn't new, right? It goes back to centuries, whether the assemblies in Greece or beyond. But the Zapatistas have that process. And it's a different type of politics, and people can theorize about it differently. Is it a politics of affect? Is it a politics of asking questions? Is it a politics of no and many yeses rather than negating each other and our ideas and our philosophies? And I think another thing that Occupy does is like, do you need Marx for everything? Do you? I mean, that's a question. And I think, do you need meta-narratives to figure out that shit's fucked up and bullshit? And I think Occupy says no, you don't. But what matters is people, and how do you build power horizontally with each other? So that's Occupy, and I'm going to hand it off to Natasha.
I don't know if I have anything to add to that, but I would just say the title kind of came out of those conversations because the first week when we were in the park, we realized people don't understand how this moment of occupying could work and how people could go to marches or demand anything when there's no leader. And that's when we thought of bringing out this journal so that, what people are thinking in the movement and what people have thought for, like, their entire life could be brought together. So we get people like Judith Butler and Gayatri Spivak to write for us, and then at the same time, we have people who are in the Occupy movement writing for us about what they're doing in the streets. And I think right now here, we just want to have that experience and try assembly format. So we were just thinking we would just start with Sandy, who was here. She wrote for the last title. Her piece is called On Fear and Complacency. And if she could read an excerpt and also talk about where we're in the movement right now, based on what your experiences are, and then we could probably open up to an assembly format.
Okay, thanks. This is kind of funny. So my piece is called On Losing Complacency and Fear. It's not really theoretical, it's just really from the heart about why it's difficult to mobilize in American society. So I'll just start. In this moment, in the United States, complacency is only slightly understandable. We can still enjoy capitalism's creature comforts, nights out with our friends at interesting bars, locally grown organic produce, hot new shoes, etc. There is still a very real space between choosing to mobilize in the face of oppression and having to for survival. Our threshold for tolerating corruption, for tolerating white-collar crimes, seems rightfully proportionate to our privilege. The American population, the 1% of the world, is wrapped in a skin filled with the memory we must shed. Memory of false hysterical narratives, of manipulations we knowingly uphold, of dreams about making it, and of an existence that seems to have stopped evolving. These false memories, as some would have us believe, these false memories require our collective insomnia. We are not at the end of history, as some would have us believe. Our current society does not represent the best we can do. There is nothing inherent to human beings that allows some to achieve success by their own volition and others to remain stagnant in reaching an acceptable quality of life. We need to connect ourselves and the products we use, the places we work, and the ideologies we uphold to the millions who deal with their consequences around the world. Whether through collective ignorance or denial, our complacency is an utter insult, heaps of salt in their gaping wounds to the impoverished millions who mobilize daily against extremely violent oppression and systematic execution. Those who cling to the last toxic droplets of trickle-down capitalism, who have the most important thing to lose, their existence and their ability to experience living in this most beautiful world, are left to eat the dust our disinterested feet kick in their faces. It is not enough to pat protesters on the back as they march by. It is not enough to do feel-good charity. It is not enough to read volumes of literature. It is not enough to talk politics at your dinner table. There is something we are missing in these moments, and it is only found when we put our bodies on the line as agents of change. To fight in this moment is to welcome discomfort, is to expect inconvenience, and is to move in spaces you have never dreamed of. So just going from that into where I think Occupy is, and then I think there'll be a discussion based on whatever. I think that's the biggest challenge, is getting people to move from sitting in forums to people to move from just reading books and just having smaller conversations about specific issues. It's how do you move from that to actually being in the streets, to actually taking action against things you take issue with. And it's really difficult. I think there's a lot of frustration from a lot of people who know that we're all very educated, we're all very aware, we have a lot of information at our fingertips. We see images of things going on around the world. Many of us have been to these places, and yet we still operate in we still participate in these systems that contribute to it. And so what is it going to take in this society, in this very comfortable society, to work against that?
I think what Sandy's saying goes to the heart of what Edgar Morin and Stefan Hessel were writing about in their new book, and also in Stefan Hessel's Time for Outrage. And so as kind of a prelude to the discussion that we're going to have, I've taken a few excerpts from their writings, and I thought what we could do to kind of get us in the mood to have a conversation is kind of read them out loud. So I'm going to pass around this piece of paper, and if you feel like reading one of the paragraphs, great. If you don't, pass it on. I'll go ahead and read the first one. Dear fellow citizens, it is our intent to denounce in this book the blindly wrong-headed course that has been set by our politicians, as well as the policies that will ultimately lead us to disaster. It is our intent to declare new hope.
It is up to us, to all of us together, to ensure that our society remains one to be proud of. Not the society of undocumented workers and deportations, of being suspicious of immigrants, not the society where gains in Social Security are being called into question, not the society where the media is in the hands of the rich.
The power of money has never been as great and selfish and shameless as it is now. The banks, now privatized, seem to care primarily about their dividends and about the enormous salaries of their executives, not about the general good. The gap between the richest and the poorest has never been so wide. Competition and the circulation of capital never so encouraged.
Even as free market capitalism claims to replace all other ideologies, it has shown itself to be a failed ideology. Overall, it impoverished far more people than it ever enriched. Globalization, development, and westernization, three aspects of a single phenomenon, have all proved incapable of solving the vital problems of humankind. Path, page 4 and 5.
Even as the process of development now underway does dispense Western-style prosperity to a small fraction of the world's population, it has also produced vast areas of poverty and fostered gigantic levels of inequality. Path, page 6.
There is no question that we are experiencing a degeneration, a withering of democracy. The drift into oligarchy is only one of those processes. The loss of political vigor among the citizenry is at the root of the drift.
Let us offer a political approach based on humanism. Such an approach respects the distinctive features and the resources of various cultures.
We must implement in-depth reforms of both the society we live in and the way we live. We need to overturn and invert the dictatorship of quantity over quality, while continue to supply the amount of goods and services needed to prevent need and destitution.
In opposition to the dictatorship of quantity, calculation, and ownership, we must encourage a broader policy of quality of life. That is to say, once again, of living well, what the sociologist Elaine Kale calls politics of conviviality. We must discourage the multiple factors that undermine the quality of air, food, water, health, and climate.
The reform of a state results from no longer considering human beings as objects that can be quantified, but as living beings endowed with autonomy, intelligence, and emotions. Path, page 26.
People are rising up more or less everywhere on earth, in spite of their extreme diversity, in opposition to the worst aspects of unbridled power and money in Arab nations, Israel, India, Chile, Spain, Greece, Iceland. We are calling for the creation of a powerful citizen movement, a broad insurrection of conscience that alone can engender a form of politics that is equal to the challenges that now face it.
The last one. Okay. I want you, each and every one of you, to have a reason to be outraged. This is precious. When something outrages you, that is when you become militant, strong, and engaged. You join the movement of history, and the great current of history continues to flow only thanks to each and every one of us. Outrage, page 23.
For the people that came in late, there's one more person that wants to read. We Untitled got the opportunity to come over here even though it wasn't scheduled. And because we saw this as an opportunity to come and see y'all and talk to you and actually open up the space for conversation. Because we live in a world where we don't have enough conversations and we don't hear enough voices that need to be heard. We need your help to make that possible, right? And right now, one more person is going to read. The idea of these readings is just so ideas can be in the room. And whatever after this is up to all of us. We would have loved to have the meeting outside because that's our public space and that's where we need to be. We would have, and to claim that. But there are different ages and it wasn't planned and we don't want to inconvenience, but that's on the table too if people feel like it. I don't want to waste a lot of time saying that, except that I'm hoping that we can have a conversation and we would act as facilitators if y'all are okay with it. Juan Carlos has been involved in social movements. He's written a piece. He was asked to kind of do a little reading, a couple of minutes, so we're going to do that. And then we'll open it up.
This is dangerous. To give a microphone to a clergyman is dangerous. We are here because you are there. A few years back, I took my niece and my nephew to the aquarium, and the image that I saw still fills my imagination. In the tank, a projected light in the shape of a fish kept moving, and thus the penguins kept chasing after it. This poignant image leads me to reflect on the human rights work and the justice movement that I've been part of for the last 2 decades. I have come to live this life as a displaced immigrant from Mexico whose family was squeezed out by a foreign neoliberal policies that have affected millions and millions negatively. The saying that is common among many of us who have been ousted is, "We are here because you are there." There, meaning our homelands from which we have been forced out under the banner of democracy and development. And then I will skip to the last paragraph, so I won't go on and on. The image of the light comes back to my mind, probing and questioning. Are we just following a light that deceives us and keeps us captive in the same molds of thinking and acting, captive to the collapsing institutions and governments that do not respond to the needs of the many nor further the common good? Or are we truly building a movement that is liberating and creating communities where doing what is good is easier than doing what is dehumanizing? Dan Berrigan poetically points to that reality whenever he is asked why he keeps resisting. Because of the children, they said, and because of the heart, and because of the bread. Because the cause is the heart's beat and the children born and the risen bread.
I think one way we can do this, and it's up to all of you, is that we can pose a couple of questions. One of the questions is, I don't know if people feel like this is the moment, but is this the moment of a social movement? Are we there? Is Occupy it? Is it not? But I think a follow-up to that is, what does a social movement look like? Should it even be a movement? To involve you and others who are not in this room. And like I said, we would have loved to have it outside. If this is something that everyone feels comfortable with, we could do that. But I think the hearing may be an issue, and that's why we thought it's probably not a good idea.
If anybody wants to just start, I'm going to start taking stack.
With regard to the others that are not here in this room, how do you reach out to individuals who come from families and cultures where actually physically reacting is something that is punishable, like their families would be punished, etc.? Do you understand what I'm saying? What is your outreach? How do you reach out?
And we'll just do, part of what we do in Occupy is the questions that people pose are the questions for others to answer. And it's something that we ask from each other. That's why the conversation is happening. I'll definitely participate, but I think that question is posed to all of us in the room.
There are many individuals that come from families and cultures and countries where speaking out would cause harm to their family. So how do you reach out to individuals who are afraid, basically, to step out?
Yeah, can I say something towards that? I remember I had the privilege of spending some time with Dolores Huerta, and everybody knows Dolores Huerta, yeah. She's an organizer in the farm movement, took the place of Cesar Chavez. And I remember her telling me that we have to give the people the opportunity to speak and act on their own, because anything less will be taking away the dignity that is theirs. And then she mentioned, that when they were organizing on the grape strike down in California, there were this encampment of trailers that they went into, Cesar and herself, they went into to ask for money for the campaign. And they saw that they were really poor. And, and she kind of was shying away from the proposal of asking for the dues that were to be given to the movement, to the strikers, to keep sustaining the strike. And she was shying away from that. And that's when she saw Cesar Chavez basically ask the lady, we are coming to collect the dues. And the lady, with a shine in her eye, basically took some money out of the jar. And Dolores Huerta said, that must have been her last monies that she had with her. But she took the money and gave it to them, and they left. It involves sacrifice. I mean, transformation. What we are about, if I read this correctly, it's about transforming structures. And if we are going to do so, we have to let people be themselves and let them take and carry the weight also for themselves. It's the dignifying thing to do. When people do so, they I mean, we are no fools. They are no fools. People know that to change the status quo is going to involve personal sacrifice. So what is the cost for each one of us? You know? And it is really great to think about those people who, you know, might be in situations that are really oppressive. But what about us? I mean, what kind of cost are we willing to pay for the change that we need to see? Are we willing to be that change?
I want to give a more practical response to the question. When people make the decision they want to act up, they want to speak out, but they live in a society where you can't. I attended in this auditorium on March 12th, Cooper Union and Swiss University sponsored event on breaking through internet censorship. And I have the name of one particular website, Tor, T-O-R, project.org, but there are others, and I don't have the information with me. We live in an amazing time because now, if you have access to a computer and an internet connection, there are ways that you can send out your message or statement through various channels of anonymizers, and you can get it out there, and hopefully, or at least not yet, you won't be discovered. Your identity won't be discovered. And the event, while I remember, was also, on March 12th, was also co-sponsored by Reporters Without Borders.
So I just want to encourage people to get closer and get involved in the conversation. And if you don't realize, I mean, this is a structure, right? This is the problem, that there's a panel and there are these chairs and some voices are privileged over others, and we don't want that to be the case. But it requires some activity on your part. Sit on the stage if you want to, right? But we need to create a structure that's not in a situation that isn't hospitable to these conversations, so that people can see each other and speak to each other.
I was just interested in, it's okay, David. I'm just interested in this question of whether Occupy is a social movement or not. And when I think about social movements, I think about this a lot because I work in a field where I'm surrounded by party dissent, like getting people at the very top of 1%, and then I'm working with a lot of those people at 99%. And I hear a lot of different feedback and input and a lot of huge amount of misinformation about Occupy. And I don't know, when I think about social movements, I primarily think of this in history about the women's movement, the environmental movement, the civil rights movement, etc. And I wonder, that early criticism and critique of Occupy is valid in terms of what does it stand for. And the media refuses to cover Occupy. I mean, look at what happened last weekend. It was barely present in the New York Times, right? The whole city was shut down. It wasn't even present, or barely present in the New York Times. And I just wonder, is this a movement or not? I think it's effective in terms of getting people into conversation who normally are not into conversation. And I believe in my heart of hearts that future leadership will emerge from the benefit of this kind of conversation and practice. But I wonder if there's more to it. So I'd love to hear some of this. Are you recording? Yeah. Oh, okay. I'll take the mic, so I think it would be. Sure, no problem.
Hi, is this on? Okay. So I think we have no choice but to see this as a social movement. If we continue to push the politics button on this, it's going to get us nowhere. I truly feel that people who continue to want to see this as a political movement are actually suppressing it without even realizing it, because politics is a symptom of a social disease. It's not the disease. The disease is a social one. It's underlying. It's an underlying cause that makes policies and politicians and greed and all of that stuff acceptable to the masses. And until we're able to talk to everyone we see in our lives about that specific issue, that really it's the underlying way that we relate to each other that has caused all of this and that continues to enable it and allow it. I think until we are able to talk about it that way with everyone, from the people on the street to the people in a doctor's offices, wherever we go. I really have become like the megaphone myself, and no one can cross my path without me mentioning that this is something they should be paying attention to, because the reality is I personally think we've reached critical mass, and there really is no turning back at this point, and it's time to really just go with it. And there will be those forces that will go against that. There will be, because they have fought long and hard to hold on to what they have. And for us to change that, we have to understand that this really is a social movement above everything else.
I tend to agree with the idea of social movement, but just a point of information or fact about myself. I think there is a fear that is coming on, and I did not live in a totalitarian state ever in my life, but since my arrest in Occupy Wall Street, I am thinking twice on every Facebook or Twitter thing that I send or email. So I think it's important to keep that in mind.
A comment, like, I think people are so used to having like a central figure to gravitate to, since there's like no leader. That's why they don't recognize that as social movement. I think people need to get past that. You don't need a figure, a person. It can just be an idea that people can just rally behind. And I think people are just having difficulties recognizing that, and difficulties recognizing it being a social movement.
Yeah, I think it's more than just a social movement. I think it's like, it's a fight. It's an actual fight. It's not just how many numbers can we get in the street. It's like, how bad do we want to be able to relate to each other in ways that are empowering? Like, how bad do we want to be able to like use our like real human nature and look at it as it should be, as like a very positive, a very welcoming thing, not this like thing that's inherently evil or has this impulsion to like destroy other people. And I think, I really think it is a fight, and I think that's why it's so interesting when people have a hard time coming into spaces where Occupy is at, because there's this way that we communicate to each other that like actually when you're on the outside of it, it's almost like alienating, because we're not used to hearing each other, and we're not used to like respecting each other's voices, and so it's like it's this real like affront. And I think it's really about fighting to like insert yourself into that, because it's really wonderful to be able to like be in even a space like this where there is like an actual infrastructure to like have one person telling a bunch of people, and like overcoming that through this is like really, really amazing. So.
Okay, so I wanted to say that it's a little too early for people to judge Occupy, because I think social movements takes time to impact people, and now people cannot say, oh, it's just a political stuff, because it's just started and not much people know about it, and people just think, oh, just a bunch of people that go hang out in the park, but it's not that. People want to express what they feel because they feel oppressed, and I think it's a social movement.
I don't think it's really relevant or necessary to argue whether it's a social movement or a political movement. I think our idea of what politics actually is, been so misconstrued. I mean, Aristotle said the highest science is the political science because it's forms of like community participation, and we're just so far-fetched and so far removed from the political system. I think we need to be everybody needs to be part of the political system, and I think within a political system there is room for social movement, there is room for social change. Just we've been so far removed from politics that arguing over whether it's a social movement or a political movement, I think they're one and the same, and it's not really, I just don't see like the usefulness in arguing whether it's a social movement or a political movement, because I think we just need to reform our understanding of what politics is.
Yeah, I'm trying to reflect on a few of the questions. One of them was about how do you address or involve people who have kind of fears of different forms of persecution, for example, for entering sort of struggle. And then this other question that's been, those are the two questions that I heard, was about whether this is a social movement and whether there's any legitimacy to trying to characterize sort of Occupy's weakness as its lack of having any clear demand or platform. I think, in a way, I mean, for me, these kinds, both the questions have a dimension of a problem that I see in general from many responses that I've heard from also friends or family members sometimes, which is the sense that there is something there and that whoever's doing it should like kind of make it better, you know? And it's so strange to me because it's like the perspective for me is skewed. It's like, or screwed up. It's like, do you really think things are going so right that this group of people should get their act together, or should we each get our act together? You know, so for the, like in terms of people risking their lives, I mean, you know, we saw it in Tunisia, we saw it in Egypt, we saw it in Libya, we saw it in Syria, we saw it in many places over the last year, that people who lived in very oppressive contexts are just learning how to say enough. And the question is whether each of us can find, you know, for me, I mean, not the question, a question is, where do we find our own place within this struggle? I don't think it started in, you know, I think the way the media frames everything, and even in our own language, when we keep referring to this as Occupy, it sort of locates it in New York. I mean, I think the real sort of innovation, if there is one here, was to put our finger on where it's really sort of moving things, you know, which is this financial dictatorship. That's what we're living under globally. And so we put our finger on that because we also went to these places and we saw, you know what, they get rid of one regime and it doesn't matter because what's behind it is much stronger. And it's able to take the tremendous sacrifice of people who've died and just redistribute it, put new people, you know, in the political positions, and then it just goes on, the same thing. So I think that's the scale of the problem. So to sort of get into arguing whether this is a social movement, a political movement, I mean, I hope it's like a paradigm shift or something that is like, you know, beyond getting people involved in a particular thing. This is about a radical sort of reassessment of something that is broken down and destroying the planet and destroying people's lives. And then, you know, so I talked too long, but feels like that's the level of discourse or conversation we need to have, because we can get into the technical arenas and analysis and picking out what's wrong, but it's like, wait a minute, do you actually think that something is terribly wrong right now? How do you use your position to change things? That's what we need to be asking ourselves. And if you think the problem is that there aren't people mobilized enough in certain communities that have these fears, then the question is to yourself, you know, what can I do to, because it seems that's a question that's important for you. Rather than asking a kind of constituted group, because this thing is not going to grow if we think that there are people who are going to do it for us.
Well, I guess what I was hoping to address was something like that. It seems like the question of what to do and what can be done isn't really being answered enough in some cases, as far as it reaches the idea of this movement as a political movement as opposed to a social one. It seems to be reaching a lot of people. It seems to be inspiring a lot of conversations. But it would be good to think about what it could do on a political scale and how it could affect the people who are actually in power and can make the changes that are asked for. And this is something that I'm always hoping to hear more about whenever Occupy is being discussed. Something that not only shows that people are out there and protesting and fighting for something, but something that shows that the fight is going somewhere and that there is a victory that we're looking at and hoping for and is achievable, so that the people who are possibly afraid or feeling endangered by this or oppressed can feel like what they're sacrificing is going to have an achievement that is going to reflect upon whatever it is that we're asking, whether it is lowering taxes or debt or anything else. It would be good for there to be signs that this is being heard and that this is actually changing the way that things are being run in the laws or what we're hoping for.
I just wanted to say, to follow up comments the young man behind me made a few minutes ago, I was involved in some environmental rallies last year, and there was a meeting where two women sort of took over a room full of people that we were all listening to, one saying, one arguing for her perspective as a member of the Republican Party and the other one as a member of the Democratic Party. And at one point I just got up and I said, and this was for an anti-fracking rally, hydraulic fracturing, and I just said, it doesn't matter. It's not about Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative. It's about protecting our air and water. It's everyone's air and water. What we're seeing right now, whether we're talking about student debt, no jobs, or anything, this country, we're in a lot of trouble, and we have to find a way to fix it ourselves. Because if we go into massive bankruptcy or fall apart, countries like China that have been stockpiling who knows how much currency are going to come in and have a little, you know, what do you call it, a bargain sale, buying up whatever they can in this country. And it doesn't matter if your skin is white, black, red, or purple with green polka dots. It doesn't matter if you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or a practicing member of the Church of Wicca, whether you're a practicing Wiccan witch. You know, the point is, it's about everybody. And in some of the issues that we deal with, like the environment, we're amazed that the people in the 1% that run companies like Chesapeake Energy aren't paying more attention, because we don't know where their children and grandchildren think they're going to go to hide and live if they end up, you know, fracking the whole planet, to be extreme. So I think sometimes, while in the previous panel I argued, personally I think Occupy is a young person's movement. When I look at 20-somethings and the debt, you know, they have such a hard time getting started in life, while in some ways I think it's a young person's movement. At the same time, it really is everybody's movement. And I didn't really understand it well until after the first panel today. And we need to get past categories or labels or whatever. You know, we just need to maybe take a step back and look at the bigger picture.
I actually don't think this should be labeled as like a social movement or anything. It's just a movement that should be done. And I think that the media plays a big part on this. And sometimes the media misinforms the people. And then they just say like, oh, it's the protest. Like they don't say like the reason for it. And then they just like look at the bad side. So that 1% of people that have the power to inform everyone and all that, they are not doing their job. And I think that those are the people that, like, they need to be taught of, like, what this movement is actually about.
Well, is this on? Go. Oh, okay. I am not a young person, and I'm his mother. And I'm very proud of that. But I would like to give you, and I know that not all of us here are young, whatever that means. I'd like to give you some of my experience as part of a movement over the last 20 years that I think might offer some tips, some advice. It's certainly not a successful movement, but I'm a mother of another son, an older son, who is very severely autistic. When he became autistic, we were convinced it was environmental toxicity, which really relates to the economic situation here and really does have some crossover to where you are. He was also part of a group of very disenfranchised people who were put into other schools, who were separated, who were left out of many things. I watched over the last 20 years how this changed. I watched this, the movement of making autism and making people with other disabilities part of the general population is far from over. It's in midstream and very troubled in many ways. However, there are lessons there. What I saw that worked, certainly the population grew because there was more environmental toxicity, but what also worked was community by community. There are certainly big organizations that have a lot of money, but what I've really seen is people go into their school districts and say, you are not going to put my kid in a hallway. You are not going to restrain my kid because he has behavioral issues related to his illness, his disability. You are going to teach him like everybody else. You're going to look and hear and listen to what he is saying, whether it's by movement or action or something, and not by speech. And I just want to throw this out. If you go around and Google and look at autism societies, look at the way this is progressing. The movement for the disabled is now being called one of the premier civil rights movements in America, as you are in the world. CUNY, say what you will, full disclosure, I do work for CUNY. CUNY is starting a program where it's going to look into how to include people with autism in CUNY colleges as students, depending on their level and what they can do, everything from professional studies to doctoral studies. When my son was diagnosed at 3.5, they said institution at 10. And never toilet trained. And now I'm dealing with people at CUNY who say, well, maybe we have a place somewhere for your son. A very, very long story, but 1% of children are now being diagnosed. It's another 1% of being diagnosed with this. And I just think that one movement can learn from another. Certainly, as younger parents, we looked at Cesar Chavez. We looked at the war, Vietnam stuff. We looked at how people did things. We looked at protest. We used politicians. We didn't care what party they were in. We called a Republican congressman and asked him to go in to our school district to tell the people they were not doing their jobs and that they were going to be arrested for violating the public officers law. I mean, it's things like that that you can extrapolate. I will stop now, but I just want to give you a blueprint for how to do it and how we're kind of halfway there now.
So I just wanted to address two comments that I heard right here next to me. One is about the power of the 1% and the news media. And I'm speaking to the comment that you made. And as somebody who's been doing this since September and as a teacher, I can tell you that the power really is yours and not theirs. It's yours to take away from them. You don't have to watch TV. You don't have to listen to what they say. That is all propaganda. And as soon as you start to think of it in terms of the power really being in your court, things will change. Things will change in your life, and they'll change. It'll change the way you think about the world around you, and it'll give you the feeling of having a lot more power than you think you do. And I think that that's one of the things that this is about. And the other thing I wanted to address was your question of achievement. People want to see that there is achievement happening. But in reality, I think that there are people out there who don't want to see that there's achievement happening. They would rather continue with the status quo because it's easier, because it does not require of them the kind of space that we're sitting in right now and the kind of thought and the kind of feeling that we are invoking by invoking our power. And I feel like the two questions are very much, or the two comments are very much related, because it really is about who has the power. And if we give our power away, whether it's knowingly or not, we're giving it away. And ultimately, until we realize that, gee, you know, I don't have to listen to that, and I can go look for the real achievements that really have happened, and I'll bet you that you'll find them. They're out there. There are website upon website of lists of things that Occupy has achieved, of things that, there is a dearth of information out there about the achievements that have been made, but they're being suppressed, and they're being ignored, and they're being actually willfully ignored by many, many people, many of whom have the best intentions in the world, but just don't feel they have the strength to deal with reality after knowing what those achievements are. And that's really the hurdle. And that's, you know, there was an article a while back that was that a lot of people heard about by Chris Hedges, who called that, you know, there was cancer in Occupy. But you know what? The concept of cancer is actually in our society. And until we face that, until we start getting healthy, we're going nowhere. We're just gonna, you know, one step forward, two steps back. So I guess I'm just trying to say, take back your power. Take it back. They don't own it. You do.
If there's anybody in the back, just go ahead.
I'm really interested in this conversation. Thanks for what everybody said. But I also wasn't sure if the things that are like burning within me right now were going to get talked about, or if that was going to be, if I was going to get like a real, a great opportunity to say that. So I'm just going to pretend that I was asked, you know, what issue is burning inside of you, and please share that.
What question is burning inside of you?
Thank you. And my understanding about the format of this is that's a fair thing for us to do. So I would encourage anyone else to not leave here, if you don't want to, without stating that burning question or comment that you have. So I've just had a few ideas that have been going through my head recently, and I'd just like to share those, just to put them out there, just so they're not only within me. First is that I went to May Day, and I was hugely inspired by that. I've been occupying since I came up here to visit Occupy Wall Street from North Carolina back in early October, and I've been here ever since. And over the winter, I wasn't sure what sort of life we had in us, but I think that was made clear on May Day. We have a lot of life and a lot of fight and a lot of beauty within us. And that was really inspiring. And then even more than that, I was so inspired to see that, like, the events aren't stopping. So, for example, here's just one flyer I've seen, which has a whole number of days of actions that are coming up, right? Like, so the website is anothernyc.org. I don't know much about it, but I'm just glad to see that we are pushing on. Another thing that I've recently learned about is Summer Disobedience School, and this is being organized by the Direct Action Working Group of Occupy Wall Street, which has been one of the most awesome and well-organized groups working within Occupy Wall Street, and certainly there are many people here who can answer any questions you might have about that. Let's see, so a few ideas. I'll run down real quick. One, I think one of the things that's most needed in the movement is a piece of literature that is highly persuasive and widely distributed. And to me, the model for this would be an organization called Vegan Outreach, which publishes highly persuasive literature that's pitched at sort of a high school or even lower level. It's very persuasive, and it's distributed very widely through a very well-organized distribution network of volunteers, mainly. Another idea I've had is that it would last summer or last fall, we had people coming here from all over the country and even internationally who knew that they could come and find a place in the park to sleep. That's what I did. I came from North Carolina and I slept in the park for about 6 weeks until we were evicted. And I'm wondering about people in other parts of the country who, may want to join this but don't have a place to stay. I would love for people who are fired up about this from in other parts of the world to know that they could come here and have a place to stay. And I heard one of our friends in Occupy Faith talking last fall about the idea of opening up churches. And this would be a way that, people could come and stay in a church knowing that they were coming to Occupy. And, you have a place to sleep and maybe some other types of support. But then during the day, you're out there occupying. So that's an idea I'd like to see maybe put into place. And finally, I would just like to say that one approach that I haven't seen used until maybe just this past May Day is the idea of pickets out in front of, for example, banks. And this is something I've been a part of in the past down in North Carolina, where we picketed a KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, because they do all sorts of terrible things. We were asking them to make changes about animal treatment. So we basically picketed and asked people who were on their way into the KFC to make another more ethical food choice. And a lot of people got the information, they got new awareness about KFC, and they chose to go somewhere else. And in the end, that branch of KFC closed. And I think that our argument for people not going to one of these big banks like, Bank of America, for example, if we explain to them why we're encouraging them to bank somewhere else, I think a lot of people would make that change. And so I'll end there. Thanks.
Even UC Davis students from Occupy shut down a bank branch in their own campus.
I want to come back on what you said, achievement of Occupy. I think that it's too early to judge if Occupy Wall Street is effective or not. Social movements takes time to impact people and make them react. And Occupy started last year. I think it's too early to judge. Excuse me. I want to take the example of civil rights movements. It takes many years for people to accept Black Americans. And I think we can use that example to make Occupy more efficient or effective. And I think that patience is the key. People need to be patient. Here in America, people like everything to be fast. But sometimes you need to be patient to see the results. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Going back to someone who mentioned Chris Hedges' critique of the Black Bloc in the Occupy movement, I would be interested in knowing what people's opinions are about if there's a core philosophy of nonviolence in the Occupy movement, or is it still too fluid, and is it possible that an ideology of violence could take over the Occupy movement?
with that. But the only statement I had previously is that even in this society, which is apparently quite free, it's still there are forces which try to silence us. So, and I feel it personally, and therefore I'm sure other people do feel it, and it's not easy to get out of the A, comfort zone, and B, the fear of coming out and talk and be active. In terms of ideas, I think that Occupy Detroit did something nice, and I think this is something that maybe other places would like to do. It's because we need, I think this place or space, a center that people can go to, is important in my mind. So kind of idea like JCCs, maybe we call it OLC, will be Occupy Living Center. So we'll be all over the place that people can go there, can sleep. It can be a place that it will be maintained, have events, talks, and discussions all over the country, different cities and boroughs. And the other one, of course, is the Occupy, something which is going on but should be enlarged, is the Occupy farms, which you also feed, etc. These are two. Question I have is whether are we tweaking the system or we are really want to change the system, which is a major question that I have. Thank you.
I'm not sure where to begin. I took the challenge to break the hierarchy of the space, and I feel rather alone right here. It's very interesting what you just said, tweaking or changing. And I feel all the time that I'm tweaking, and I'm responding actually to the woman behind you who talked about autism. It made me think about accountability and what we need to do to make ourselves individually, as you were speaking, aware of our own accountability, but also the institutions within which we work and operate. And maybe that's an element of tweaking. It's horribly intolerable to be victimized. And it is also a very bad position to feel as if one is a perpetrator. It's a little bit the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas, who talks about half guilt and half innocence. And perhaps what we need to think about is how we can build awareness so that we can accept that we are all, in our own way, half guilty and half innocent, and thereby capable of being an agent for tweaking or for change. That we don't have the weight of 1% on us or the weight of 99% on us, but it's all mixed up, and we're capable of churning that mixture.
Is this on? No. Oh, yeah, it is. I was just actually going to, I feel typecast in this role, but I should respond to the Black Bloc thing. You know, the thing about those Hedges pieces, everything he said was actually factually wrong. There is no actually violent group. The people who do occasionally do Black Bloc as a tactic will, you know, are sometimes just, you know, holding up shields to protect other protesters from police bullets. Occasionally, they will. Some will engage in symbolic property destruction. But like we were talking about Kentucky Fried Chicken, there's a Gandhian group called the KRRS in India that has systematically destroyed Kentucky Fried Chicken's branches, you know, as an act of nonviolent civil disobedience, way beyond anything the Black Bloc has ever proposed doing, because he never hurt people. We're really talking about sort of definitions of nonviolence, whether it's Berrigan nonviolence or whether it's, you know, Gandhi nonviolence, although some Gandhians have even gone over to say that damaging something now and then, if you don't hurt anybody in the process, is okay. So we're talking about arguments about what sort of nonviolence. I don't think anybody's actually calling for actual violence. And even, I do think it's interesting that there was a sudden moral crisis in when was it, February or March, about an incident that had happened in November in Oakland involving like 2 people and 2 windows or something like that, at just the moment when groups that might otherwise have been interested in making a moral issue out of the actual violence, massive violence again of the police against nonviolent protesters during the evictions, you know, where those groups might have like been getting up a moral rage about that. They instead should, you know, get into a moral rage about an incident that had happened in 1 out of 500 occupations, you know, 3 months before. I think that's telling. But in a broader sense, you know, I think a lot of groups that had been trying to co-opt the movement and weren't able to just sort of threw up their hands, and that was their way of going away. And maybe it's good that they've gone away. Actually, I think it is. Because I think that, you know, to become the thing about OWS is it grew so fast. I mean, 6 months, 2 months, it was just extraordinary. So it really needs some time to sink proper roots, because the project is one of a cultural transformation. We're trying to create a democratic culture where one has not existed. America goes around telling everybody it's like the beacon of democracy, but almost none of us know how to actually practice democracy. We have to learn this stuff from the ground up in everything we do, and I think that's what we're starting to do now.
I want to, can I say something? How much time do we have left? We can go a little longer. That's great. I also want to encourage people just to keep perspective. These are the conversations that we need to have, right? This is what Occupy tries to do. So, but I do want to be mindful that people have raised their hand, and so we're going to stay in line and try to just continue to have this conversation.
One response. I think that Chris Hedges is a good source of good information, and I will continue to read him, and I think he's a good investigator. Just the last comment, the history of the 60s with the counterintelligence program known as COINTEL, where the forces of authority actively tried to incriminate nonviolent activists. Is the Occupy people aware of this? I mean, I'm sure they are. I don't want to patronize people. The COINTEL program, there are people. This is agents provocateurs, and to discredit social movements. I'm sure people should be aware of that.
I'll be translating as best as I can. So.
Comenzaré diciendo una reflexión acerca de lo que significa el concepto Occupy, parafraseando a uno de los líderes revolucionarios que decía: la tierra es de quien la trabaja, no del terrateniente.
She would like to begin with a reflection on Occupy by basically saying, from one of the revolutionary leaders, I think from Mexico, is the land that is, the land belongs to the one who works it.
Mis preguntas al respecto de cómo se vislumbra el movimiento Occupy son
Her questions about how the movement of Occupy is seen are
acerca de un ejemplo que tenemos en México, que es el movimiento del ZLN, el cual se levantó en 1994 con un proceso político bastante fuerte donde comenzó una devaluación económica, y a raíz de eso una parte del México indígena se hizo notar a nivel mundial.
Yeah, so she's taking us back to the uprising from the Zapatistas back in 1994, when the economic crisis by the neoliberal governments was being imposed, el Tratado de Libre Comercio, the Free Trade Agreement. So,
respecto a eso, La reflexión sería, como ya lo había dicho, cómo se vislumbra el movimiento Occupy cuando hubo una fuerte búsqueda de los líderes del movimiento del ZLN y muerte, masacre en varias partes de México y desaparecidos, al igual que en el 68 y otros movimientos más que ha habido en mi país. Comenzaron a vincularse con la idea y los conceptos ancestrales indígenas sobre las autonomías indígenas.
So this goes because of the repression in Mexico. The leaders were being identified and disappear. So they began somehow rooting themselves in their ancestral traditions, ancestral ways of organizing themselves, to the point of
Okay. Yeah, because entonces la pregunta sería, ¿cuál es el vínculo que Occupy tiene con otros movimientos que se han gestado en América Latina, como lo fue el 68, como lo ha sido el movimiento de Lucio Cabañas, Genaro Vázquez Rojas, el EPR, que es uno de los grupos más radicales de México, la Liga 23 de septiembre y actualmente el ZLN? ¿Cómo ellos o cómo ustedes quieren vincular desde la cabeza del monstruo, del sistema, cómo quieren vincular a Occupy con otros movimientos sociales en México y en América Latina?
Occupy, the issue that I want to get to is what linkage Occupy has with other movements in Latin America, such as this 1968 movement, or the LPR, which is one of the most revolutionary, most radical revolutionary movements in Mexico, or the Liga 23, the Liga 23 September 23 League. So the question is how you in Occupy want to focus the linkage entre la cabeza del monstruo y from the head of the monster to these movements in Latin America.
Yeah, I think that's really the question, and I think I was actually originally kind of got on stack to respond to the diversity of tactics debate, which has been ongoing. And just to respond to that really quick, I think in the past 3 months since Hedges' article came out and actually David's response, I think we've made a lot of progress. And David Graeber, I think we've made a lot of progress as a movement here in New York in particular, and like that debate being productive. And despite us not reaching any formal action agreements, we saw on May 1st, tens of thousands of people in the streets, unpermitted, and there wasn't a scrap of symbolic property damage. However, there was a separation of time, place, and manner between different activities that wanted to be more active and assertive, maybe in their expressions of discontent and their demonstrations. There was a Wildcat March at 1 p.m. that was separate from Occupy and not saddled by the brand of Occupy either. So I thought that's a good something that we should congratulate ourselves on, that we've made some progress on that end. Yeah, I mean, to the point about connecting the struggle globally, I think, yeah, it's key. I think a lot of people in this country were drawn to Occupy due to the effect that it had on themselves personally, their own access to a future and economic, access, and the foreclosure crisis and unemployment. And that's, what really drew people to participating in activism and challenging the systems that exist. And there's still a massive disconnect between kind of the root source of that cause, and that it is a global issue. And until, I think it's a process. I think there's a process awareness and consciousness and knowledge and radicalization that occurs, and people, ideally, and myself, as I've been involved with organic grassroots activism over the past several years of my life, it has escalated in my own analysis from being focused on more personal issues and issues that affect my own immediate community to then becoming engaged and pursuing that knowledge that recognizes that it is an interconnected, the intersectionality of all of these issues, and then just a moral choice to say that, the struggle is not over until we all win and until we all are striving towards and achieving liberation. That's economic, that's social, that's spiritual. So yeah, I think a lot of people that have been drawn to Occupy have that more comprehensive analysis now, but it has yet to kind of spread to throughout the rest of the country who are still most immediately concerned with the national economy and their own well-being.
I kind of forgot my question, so I just think we have to ask ourselves, everybody, what is the power that they have over us, and when or if we get it back, what are we going to do with it? Because it sounded so good in my head, but I just can't put it in the words. Because if democracy, everyone has a voice, right? But feasibly, it's really not possible for everyone to hear everybody else and take into consideration what works for me probably won't work for her, might not work for her, might not work for him. So what we have now seems like the most reasonable solution, but look where that's gotten us so far, because as long as they're I think the root of everything is money, and as long as money exists, there'll always be greed. There'll always be the way our society works, capitalism. People work to get their money, and see, this is what people like me, I can't. My voice is stupid, so I can't think. I'm so scatterbrained. Just what is the power they have over us, and what will we do when or if we get it back? That's pretty much what I was getting at.
I just want to. So I put. So Natasha's doing a kind of, we're wrapping up right now. We're running out of time. So there's a couple of things that we use in Occupy that are just relevant for the type of ethos that people can take regardless of what you identify with. But I think one of them is step up, step back. If you've spoken too much, try to speak a little less. The other thing is progressive stack. So the person that was taking names is saying, you know what, if I've called a lot on one person, I'm going to bump up some voices that we haven't heard, whether they're traditionally marginalized or whatever, but at least allow some space for that. I want to say something, so I put myself on stack, and that's the idea of like, don't be fooled by that violence conversation. There's tons of violence happening. It's perpetuated every day in the systems that actually oppress us. And we're actually so endemic, they're in our system, that we perpetuate them individually because institutions don't exist without people. We create them. We can take our consent away from them. The violence is happening every day. And to ask for people to renounce violence, that's, as a Palestinian, that's what for 50 years they've been telling us to do. And I'm just speaking as a person. Renounce violence, right, even though you're under occupation, as if occupation isn't violent, right? Renounce that, we'll talk to you. And we see how far that gotten us. And I don't need to say anything about that. But I think one of the things is, right, is that you create space and you listen to other people. What we're not good at is listening to each other.
Right here? Is this on, right? Okay. I think what he was trying to say, and actually I was going to say the same thing, was I used to be a teacher. And when I was a teacher, I used to have a class of about 45 to 50 students. And eventually, when you have a class of about 45 to 50 students, they start to escalate and they get really, really, really loud. And as a teacher, you eventually have to say, be quiet. And you try and get them to calm down so that you can instruct them. And I used to use the Jaws theme because eventually they would go dun, 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 and then they would get very loud. And so finally you would calm them down so they could hear you and you could instruct them. I think what he was trying to say is that change and people's attitudes for thinking, it's eventually going to happen, and people, our society does work on money. And money eventually will happen, and people's attitudes don't change because money is going to, greed is going to take over, and it's really hard to change people's attitudes when greed is eventually going to happen and things just keep. The thing is a movement going to change things overnight? Can a sanction on Bank of America eventually change things completely? And that's the thing. Is it going to just justify the reasons for making a social conscience? Is it going to happen overnight? Because I don't know. I think that's the comment he was trying to make, and I don't know. I think it's a responsibility for the community, and I think what we're trying to say is it's a social movement, but I think it's a community movement. And I don't know, I've been sitting back here listening, and I think that's my overall take on everything. And so that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.